Welcome to the Right to Reason podcast. I am your host, Robert Stanley. We are talking to Pastor Marc about the problem of evil.
It's the Right to Reason podcast.
This episode of the Right to Reason podcast is brought to you by our patrons and contributors like me. We have all recognized the value of the unrestrained marketplace of ideas and have decided to make a difference. You can make a difference too. Contribute at patreon.com/right and learn more about your right to reason at therighttoreason.com. Your activism is appreciated.
Pastor Marc, how are you, sir?
I am good.
I'm happy to be talking to you again. I want to say we met at an R&R debate. And
we did, actually. That was at the church at Tree Lake.
Yeah.
He was debating Tyler Vela, who you need to get on your show if you haven't.
Okay.
But that was actually done by a group I'm a part of called the Mentionables that put on the event. Had y'all wonderful skeptics actually come to the event instead of just the debate, you could have heard my talk.
Oh, I'm sorry I missed it. Everybody can hear all of Pastor Marc's talks at Pastor Marc. That's the name of his YouTube channel. You are the preacher of Liberty Hill Baptist Church. Am I saying that right?
You are. So far, they have not yet caught on that I don't know what I'm doing. And
I'll talk to Catholics, that don't really know a whole lot about Baptists. I grew up Baptist, independent Baptist. My dad was a Baptist preacher, and I wanted to be a Baptist preacher myself, and my brother was even one. But I'll talk to Catholics about it, and they'll say something like, "So you guys really are into baptism?" I'm like, "Not so much." They're like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "Well, for us, it's more of like a show of your faith, a community thing that you do with the church to profess your faith to others." And they're like, "What? Are you kidding me? Like, your name is Baptist. It's in the name." Like, yeah, we're like it's like the least valuable thing to us, ironically.
Yeah, that's kind of strange how, sadly, baptism has kind of gotten, kind of backseat to everything else.
Is it supposed to be a big deal, would you say?
I think it is kind of in the same way that like a wedding ceremony is a big deal. Is the way I put it, because you're just making a big deal of what you're doing, of who you're committing to. This is a major thing in my life. And so to just kind of go,
Yeah. Except like with us, Christ enters us before the ceremony, whereas in wedding, you're supposed to enter someone after the ceremany. So that's horrible.
That's how that works.
Mark Lambert.
The Baptists get that one wrong too sometimes.
Yeah, right. We've all made that error before, sure. So today, that's a hell of a way to start a conversation with a preacher. Tell us a little bit about yourself real quick, and then I wanted to ask you about hell.
Okay. A little bit about myself. I am 43 years old, got a wife we just celebrated our 18th wedding anniversary, got 3 wonderful little girls, 11, 7, and 6. And I was raised Christian, but it was probably somewhere junior high that God just really grabbed me. Then in college, I wandered off, never stopped believing, I just stopped caring. And then I was actually chasing a girl who would one day become my wife, and I chased her right into the Baptist student ministry of the college we were attending. And
like physically chasing her?
Well, I wasn't physically.
Like running after?
I was following her. Not like a stalker would. It was just, that's where she's going, so that's where I want to be. God used that to grab hold of me. And the director there was the kind of guy where it's like you walk in the door and he's like, "Hi, nice to meet you. Here, go make some copies of this. And can you clean out that water cooler for me? Okay, thanks." And it's like, so I immediately just got thrown in the mix. And I've been doing ministry ever since. Started that as a volunteer student on campus. And then just now I'm vocational. And
so just like getting the marriage stuff backwards we were talking about earlier with the ceremony of baptism, you were doing the honey-do list even before you were the honey. That's nuts. Yeah. So your concept of hell, is this fire, brimstone, gnashing of teeth, eternity of flame and torture?
My view of hell is that it's unpleasant. I think that a lot of the descriptors of hell in the Bible are figurative. Like you're not like sitting in an actual flame, having your skin flayed off for eternity. But it does show that this is not somewhere you want to be. Okay.
And so here's my idea.
Yeah.
Here's my idea, because we were going to discuss the problem of evil today. I was thinking about hell in the sense of if it is bad, and by bad, let's say worse than, a regular day on Earth, not a great day, a typical Monday that you don't remember. Nothing bad, nothing good, just boring. If hell is worse than that, and the majority of people go to hell, can we at least agree with that?
Yeah, that seems to be the case.
Then it was worse for mankind as a whole, not just of those that went to heaven, but as a group of humanity, it was worse for us to be created, at least created in the scenario where God created hell, what have you, than if not. So for me, like a lot of people like to talk about, hurricanes or childhood leukemia. I'm sure we'll get into those delightful topics throughout the conversation. But right from the start, to me, that seems like a pretty simple, self-evident concept that God creating the reality that we have as it is, both physical and spiritual, it was bad for mankind. And to me, that would then mean that God did something bad by creating humans. Is that possible?
Well, see, I think that there's a lot of assumptions that's built into that, or into any, idea contrary I might have that gets into things that we just cannot know.
Okay.
Would it be better for God to have just not created at all? Well, we might want to say so, but that gets into, God would know, is existence better than non-existence, even existence with some bad, even existence with a lot of bad. And so, that gets into things that I think is completely above either one of our pay grade.
If we're in a business meeting, you and I are, you're the VP of this, I'm the VP of that. There's a couple other VPs. There's a CEO. He's got to report something to the board of directors in a second. And we know we've got a budget crisis, and we present the data to our CEO, right? You present your department's data, I present mine. And he says, I know you're telling me we need to cut back on finances, but I just don't know. Maybe there's information we don't have, right? And we say, yeah, but we can't get that information. We don't have a crystal ball, Jack. Boss, you need to make some cuts. At that point, he would base the decision based on the information he has available, right? That's what we do with our lives all the time.
Right.
So I feel like whenever we have these philosophical conversations, as soon as we start to get into something about God or, this unknown ether, as it were, and we make a critique of God based on information we have, I often hear from believers, yeah, but. And what follows the yeah, but is always something like, maybe it was this, maybe it was that. We don't really know. And I don't know, it's a little disappointing because I would feel like we're having a conversation based on what we do know. And we do know, at least I think maybe we don't know, but you and I both understand the concept of hell to be bad for the majority of mankind.
Well, it'd definitely be unpleasant for the majority of mankind.
Right. By unpleasant, we mean worse than this, and therefore that's what I meant by bad. I'm just trying to be concise.
But here's the thing, you were asking a specific question about a specific occurrence. So you go, okay, well, let's take into consideration everything we do know, right? Because the question kind of gets into things we don't know. So what do we do know? Well, we know that God loves us. We know that God is good. We know that, author of life and blessings and all this other stuff. So it's like, okay, we get into a situation where it's like, all of that doesn't maybe quite seem to mesh with, the hell thing. Mm-hmm. So what do we do with it? And we say, well, okay, what I do know about God says he's got to have a good reason.
Right. So you're starting with God is good, and then everything else.
I'm starting with God is God.
Well, sure, fair enough. No, I'll grant that. But then you're seeing him as an omnibenevolent character, right? And then if something doesn't fit into that, then that thing must be the wrong shape. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. So it doesn't mean, well, hell doesn't really fit into a good God, so therefore hell must not exist. But you must create some kind of scenario that hell could still exist, but would still work with being created by omnibenevolence. Would that be fair?
Yeah.
And to me, that seems intellectually dishonest. Not like you're a liar by any means. We've met. You're a totally cool dude. But what's funny, before we continue, funny thing about that is I remember I'm over there talking to you guys and all the mentionables, right? That's their name. Mm-hmm. And speaking of that, should we include that link in today's show notes, Mark? Also the mentionables.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
Pastor Marc's YouTube channel will be in the show notes as well, everybody. So please look for that. Click on that. Check out some more of what he's talking about, because you really can't sum everything up in 1 hour, in a 1 hour conversation, of course. But, go there, comment there, give him some feedback from maybe an atheist perspective. I'm sure he'd love to be challenged that way. But I'm talking to you guys, and I'm getting dirty looks from the atheist group. It's like they totally segregated, like a 1950s kind of thing with like blacks and whites, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
all the atheists are over there like huddled up around like Aaron's, what's the book? My wife actually bought one of them. What's Aaron's book?
I don't remember.
Fundamental Fallacies of Creation or something like that. I can't remember. But anyway,
Yeah.
but they're all over there around his book table talking, and I'm over there talking to you guys. And they're just giving me these dirty looks. Even Aaron's wife was giving me a dirty look. She's blocked me on Facebook, by the way. But
Well, what was really funny about that is watching Aaron and Tyler go at it. I mean, they both argued their points, aggressive and firm. Well, then afterwards we went to lunch, and it was, everybody's just hanging out and chit-chatting and having a great old time.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So I say all that to say you're a fun guy to talk to. I like you. So I don't mean you're dishonest, but I think it's intellectually dishonest to pick one part of the Bible that you're going to say everything else must align with. And then, instead of saying all of this must be true equally. You know what I mean? To me, that's kind of a form of special pleading. Well,
not really, because the parts that are saying, okay, all this has to align with are the foundational parts, right? Those are the parts that, if these are not true, the whole thing is just total bogus. And so, but you take those things that form the core, the center of what you know about God and reality, and then you have this question about something else, and you're like, well, I'm not sure, but I know these are true, so it's got to fit in there somewhere.
So the nature of God would be foundational.
Right.
What about what you see? Like, just you wake up in the morning, you get your coffee, you walk out, there's a sunrise, you get in your car, you drive to the church, what have you. All these things, these are things you know are true. These are super concrete things. Would these be equally foundational to your belief in God? Just reality itself that, you're able to witness empirically? I'm saying, like sure. I knock on my desk, you heard the sound. Is that just as real to you as the nature of God is real? Or would you say well, this thing's more real because I know that's there, whether God exists or not, that's for sure there. Or would you say, no, that's foundational?
I think I could probably, I think the Bible actually says that, the things that are unseen are actually the more important, more real. But yeah, I mean, let's just say, put them on the sure. same level. I know my desk is here.
Right.
I know the voice coming to me through the computer is a real person we've met, and all of that I know is true and real about my experience as God is as well.
Okay, so if you wouldn't say everything in the Bible has to line up equally, that some things are more foundational than others, and those other things would be, contingent to those more fundamental parts of the Bible, could we then say you can look around reality and knowing that is real is just as real as, the aforementioned childhood leukemia, the suffering all around the world? That's real, and that should be foundational. If the Bible isn't going to offer you contradiction, even though it appears to be contradictory, at least we could say it appears to be, maybe it's not. But the fact that there is so much suffering in the world, and also the fact that God is omnibenevolent, according to you, right? Mm-hmm. Isn't that at least a contradictory thing? I mean, those should be two foundational things that I would think would challenge you.
It would depend on why the suffering exists and who God is. One thing, I don't know, maybe I'm just a sociopath.
I doubt that.
Because like the problem of evil, even the problem of suffering, it's just never gotten off the ground with me.
Okay.
Never. I understand that there's people that wrestle with it, that they look at the suffering, and I'm not without empathy or compassion. I see that suffering goes on. But as far as something that would be, a criticism of or contradiction on or somehow, an attack on or a hit against God, that's just dead on arrival for me. I've never understood it. Intellectually I understand. I don't see how it's appealing to people because
it's appealing to me. I totally get it. I'm sure you can empathize with someone being challenged by their faith when they go through like a terrible hardship in their life, and they say, how could a loving God let, my child die, or how could a loving God let my house burn down whenever he knew I didn't have the money to have another home? I'm homeless. We could go through a million of these, and a million are occurring all the time.
I guess I should correct and say that I see the emotional experience of it. I've had some of that myself, but then to go from that to therefore all these other things must be false. That's just dots that don't connect.
That was my challenge. What was the benevolence thing? That was the biggest one for me. Is I already had some doubts, but I was still going to church. Late 20s, and my daughter hit about 5 years old, and I got major anxiety, man, because the way I was raised is that's right around the age that a child is able to understand the concept of salvation, of repentance. Now, not like it's a magic year, but somewhere around that time, 5 to 10, 5 to 12, what have you. And I started thinking, wow, what happens if she gets in a car accident? I was terrified, and I thought I better get this kid saved up quick before God sends her to hell. And, if the worst were to happen to her. And that's when it dawned on me. That's kind of why I wanted to start the convo with hell with you, because that's kind of where it started with me, is what kind of a sick God would do that,
Here's the thing, and this is one thing that I find, and, if you actually go on my YouTube channel and listen to some of my sermons, you'll notice the one thing that I try to make sure always gets put in there is whatever the singular issue that's being talked about, we have to put it in the context of the overall narrative. Because what happens is you start with, wow, hell sounds bad. Why would God? Okay, well, we're by that time we're already into like Act 3 of the story, right? Mm-hmm. But you understand the overall what's going on. God created and what happened and all of that. For me, personally, me wrestling with things whenever I look at the suffering, whenever I see it, I'm putting it into the context of the overall story of mankind, then it doesn't pose the challenge to God that people often think it does.
Do we have free will in heaven?
Yes.
So God can create a reality where free will and a lack of sin can both exist simultaneously. Would that be fair?
Strictly speaking, yes, I think so.
So why didn't he do that?
Because it's probably, and again, this is getting into that God would know and I wouldn't.
Sure. But
it seems
based on
to
what
me
we know,
that it would be better to have gone through. Like I heard a quote, I wish I remember who said it. This world that we live in may not be the best possible world, but it may be the best way to get to the best possible world.
Wow. And then that next one may not be the best possible world, but be the best way to get to another one. Well, if you with that kind of thinking, you could really explain anything away that way. Oof. Imagine all the atrocities you could think up throughout human history with that kind of thinking.
Can I take just a few minutes to line out and kind of, if we're kind of getting the problem of evil, let's actually get into what evil is and the problem. And I guess I could show how I think through it.
Sure.
There's always your common theodicies, free will, soul building,
Yeah.
Have you ever thought of something that you thought was original to you, and then you find something and go, oh, wait, that wasn't original to me? People didn't think about this.
Yes. All the time.
I was in a discussion with a lady, non-believer, who was raised in church, and she had gone through some horrible abuse. And just through the conversation, off and on, we talked, had to have been a year and a half. And one of the things that really came out for me of that is all the things that it would take, all the ways that you could say God could have or should have stopped that abuse. How would he have done it? It would actually require God to stop something that was initially created for and intended for good.
You got to explain that.
I later found out this is called, I think, like it's not natural law theodicy or something, but it's God creates a world.
Well, hold on. Can you say it again? Because that totally went right past me.
The ways in which God would intervene to stop an evil is he would have to interfere or stop something that he created for good.
Yeah, I'm still not. Mark, I'm just
Okay.
not getting it, man.
So look at the things in life that bring us suffering, right?
Okay.
I mean, physical pain, right? But our, neurosystem, our neurological system, I'm getting tongue-tied, but all of that is designed for all kinds of wonderful purposes, right? The same nerve endings that, send signals to our brain to say pain also send signals to our brain to say pleasure, right? That was made for something good that now something painful is coming to us through. Relationships, right? Betrayal, abuse, right? We are made to be a social creature. We thrive on and need intimacy and relationships and community, but those also are sometimes the source of the pain and suffering that we endure. Even natural evils, the laws of nature that God has lined out that has this amazing world that functions according to orderly processes that we can learn and study and know and harness. Well, sometimes those processes, if they become abused or if we get in the way of them, cause us. I mean, I used to live in Southern California. The nice weather and the beaches only outweigh the earthquakes for so long,
Right.
But you choose to be in that location, getting in the way of nature, and so you have all of that. Where it's like all the things that bring us pain do so using, I guess, as a catalyst the things that are there for our good. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me as a claim. I don't know that you could support that.
I think it's obviously true. I mean, I don't know how.
So this is the argument from design, right? But you're also mapping on this or tacking on this the same claim you were making before, that God's benevolent. I feel like you're mixing these two together to say your nerve endings were designed for good. The beach was designed for good. Like all these things, it seems like once again, no offense, but take it with a grain of salt, but a very myopic and naive perspective, very, very human-centered perspective of reality, that this was all for our benefit. Where, I would think it's more like, we're just here because genes are trying to find the most efficient way to continue reproducing and spreading themselves, So I don't know that we could say that it's for good.
But if we are talking about the Christian God, about the biblical God, we're talking about the biblical worldview. And so, I mean, you could just say, no, that's all hooey, so just throw it all out. Well, okay, great. But we're talking within the context of God being real and he created. If that's not the context we're talking in, then we're not even talking about God or the problem of evil or any of that.
Okay. Well, I see your point. I thought you were saying, well, come on, let's take a step out of the supernatural or the spiritual or what have you and look at just reality. You can see it, see this explained just in your everyday life and your life experience. But if you're saying we're still in that vein, but...
All right. If we're addressing the problem of evil as evil and suffering is a problem for God, well, then we're going to have to address that in the context of God being the creator.
What if he's bad? Just hypothetically, as a thought experiment, I think we could make a pretty powerful argument. If you and I kind of almost played a game with it and tried to imagine God as evil, not in some blasphemous way, but just hypothetically speaking, look at all these horrible things that he has. We could go through the Old Testament and say, like, well, what's with this guy obsessed with the smell of burning flesh, and why is everything like blood related? Like that seems pretty diabolical and dark, and he's gotta blame us for something that he kind of set into place, and then apparently he sends his son to die, and that blood washes over us, and the whole thing. I don't think it would be hard to, if you were like writing a script for a movie, it wouldn't be hard to characterize God as evil, would it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be
like a demiurge or something,
I mean, I guess if you want to, twist things and write that story, you could, twist anything into making something bad.
Right. So if I started with that premise, if I said that was foundational to my understanding of Scripture and also foundational to my interpretation of reality itself, like you'd said before, that same knock on wood is on the same level, if not under, I think you might have said, correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm putting words in your mouth, under your foundational faith, and part of that being the nature of God, then if I came at all of it that way as God is evil, I could then show, since God is evil, this happens. Since God is evil, that happens. And I could even use the same analogy you just did about nerve endings and sunsets on the beach, where I could say, I mean, just look at all of how horrible this is. That's where hurricanes come from, and your body was designed for pain. You might get pleasure from it sometimes, but this demiurge God actually created it for evil. You see how, like, if I were to come at it with that level of what I referred to as intellectual dishonesty before, we could just break it down to say, if I came at it with just that sense of bias, I could explain anything in the same way you could write a script where God's evil, right?
Well, you could spin that tale if you wanted to, but the notion of God being evil is incoherent.
How so?
Because as the sovereign creator, which is kind of wrapped up in, what God is, right? He creates the world, which would include what is moral. And so God is the source or the standard, of morality. And so saying God is evil is like saying the Constitution is illegal. It's like say you're in Bell County. Say they pass a law that says, police don't need a warrant to search your house. And you go, well, the Constitution says they do. And they go, no, that's illegal. We said so. Well, that's not how it works. The Constitution is the basis for what determines what's illegal. It itself cannot be illegal. And likewise, God is the source, the standard of what is good. And so he himself cannot be evil.
If then we could look at moral advancements that we made without God as humans, things that he didn't tell us to do, that we would agree, you and I, are good. And then we could also bring up things that were in the Bible that he said to do at the time that we would say are bad, that we shouldn't do. Would you then find that to be a convincing argument that God is evil?
No, he can't be evil. If we disagree, and we go, well, you know what? We see that thing that God did, and we go, oh, well, that I don't like that. I think that's evil. Then we just get to be wrong. Because
divine command theory, like everything good must come from God?
I wouldn't say divine command theory. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to divine command theory. Sure. Typically, it's just and I know you know these. I've listened to some of your episodes. The whole nature of God, is the standard of what is good. And so it means like we don't need a command from God, right? If God never issued any commands, morality would still be what it is, even if he never told us about it, or even if we never, figured it out. It still would be what it is. I mean, that's
okay. But in the same objective stance, all right. I'm on one end. I'm on the blue side. You're on the red side, right? Like we're like politicians or something. And I'm saying God's
like
evil
red versus blue. Have you seen that? The Halo characters.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah. We're the Halo characters. But we're making an argument. I'm saying God's evil. You're saying God's good. If I can make an argument that shows that we have moral developments that happened without God, or at least without, we could say some kind of evidence of God in them, right? Aside from saying, well, everything comes from God and God's good. We're being objective as much as we can, right? In the same way I could say, well, everything comes from God, God's bad. We're ignoring that a priori argument, right? But if we're trying to be objective and we're trying to convince an audience that isn't sure which way to go, and I say, and at the risk of redundancy, I can find things in the Bible that both Mark and I would say are bad, and I can find things that are good that we developed without any evidence of God being included in them, or any instruction from God, such as democracy, for example, or our understanding of civil rights today, anti-slavery, equality. We could probably go on for a while on that one.
I was going to say, you'd have a hard case making those without reference to God, because those are like totally based on foundational Christian principles.
Well, let's start with one, democracy. This is something that we would say that we would both agree is good, that doesn't have any kind of foundation from the Bible, but has developed liberty over time. Well, sure, you can say liberty, or that's a different topic.
Well, I mean, I'd say liberty, democracy.
Sure, we like freedom.
Get a whole political thing about democracy versus republican. A straight democracy, pretty much.
Oh, sure, we wouldn't want that, but the concept of a democratic political system, we would say, is a good thing. But that's not something that's represented in the Bible. But that's something that we have learned over time with no God needed, if we're going to look at it objectively.
I'd say some of the principles of why we developed it are in the Bible.
Yeah, I could make the same argument and say God's evil. Like we could come at it either way with that. But that I'm just saying, like just one of those. That would be an example of something we developed without God's instruction. But then if we look at God's instruction, we could, you and I both know, we could find a lot of things that we would say.
There's a lot of good. I'd say there's a lot of good things that we've developed that are amoral. Is that the right word?
Sure.
Neither good nor bad, right? I mean, democracy doesn't necessarily have any inherent morality to it. But democracy can do absolutely horrific, things, and democracy can do absolutely wonderful things.
They're good things that we've developed that are amoral. That's a little confusing. You mean like beneficial, but not necessarily on the topic of ethics?
Right. These are useful. These are, things that we've developed, but is it right or wrong to do it or not do it?
Yeah, I would say having an authority over a person without them having some kind of representation in their government, that is wrong. That's authoritarianism. And that's something supported by the Bible.
I would agree, and I would agree on that because of biblical principles.
But biblical principles are authoritarian in nature. We know that. I mean, it isn't the paradise that God's looking to give us one day.
I don't have a problem with right authorities. I mean, rightful authorities exercising their authority.
You do on the earth. Outside of the special pleading of God, you do have a problem with that because everybody always claims they have the right one, right? Like Stalin said he had the right one. Hitler said he had the right one. We could go through all of human history. We know that that's not the best way to do it because we're supposed to all come together and decide as a group the best that we can.
I mean, if I come into your house and you're like, hey man, you need to take off your shoes. I'm like, I'm not taking off my shoes. I don't have to take off my shoes. I'm going to drop a deuce right here in your living room.
Right.
You have the rightful authority to say, no, you're not, get out. Right?
Of course. That's my house.
That's your rightful authority. In that sphere, you have that authority, and it's rightful. It's like I wouldn't have a problem with God's authority because he's God. I don't have a problem with a municipal authority who is rightly exercising their authority.
I think you do. I don't think you base it on whether or not they're an authority. I think you base it on whether or not it's ethical.
That comes into it.
If you're a Jew in Hitler's Germany, I don't think you, as right. Marc the Jew in 1920s Germany, what have you, I don't think you say, the guy's got a point. It is his house.
Well, but that's appealing to an authority above them.
Right. Morals. And I'm saying that we are appealing to an authority that we're not getting from God whenever we say democracy is ethical. It's not just amoral. It's actually better than the forms of authoritarianism that preceded it. And we did it without God.
I don't know that we can say we did.
We can at least say it's better. Can we agree with that? And that it is ethical.
Yeah, we go with that.
The taxation without representation was an advancement for humanity. Not for all humans. It excluded many of us, but at least for the majority of white landowners, male white landowners at the time, that then spread to others, minorities, women, what have you. Yeah, I would say it's better, and that's something that we got without the Bible. Whereas we could go throughout the Bible and find examples of women being treated like property. God endorsing different forms of slavery for the Jews to execute upon not just other Jews, but also upon Gentiles.
Here's the thing, though, man. If you want to start going there, you've got such an uphill climb to make. Because I don't know that we would have gotten to taxation without representation, equal rights, civil rights, apart from the principles found in the Bible. I mean, there may not be the Bible says to do this, but at the level of life principles that we find in there about individual liberty, about private ownership of property, about the one human race, all descended from Adam and Eve, all created in the image of God. When it comes to the slavery thing, I mean, the Bible, you're going to find far, far more in the Bible about the regulation and protection over servants and slaves than you're going to about anything dehumanizing and abusing towards them. You point at these things and say, oh, well, we did these without God. Well, we did them without a direct command from God, but the ideas that led us to do them are totally grounded in biblical principles.
In order to prove you wrong, we'd have to find, because I mean, man, okay, so.
Well, you can just look at the people that stood up and led these movements. They're pointing at the Bible and they're saying, this is why we're doing it.
Sure, like
this is why these things are wrong.
Okay, so I agree with you, and I can totally give props to religion as its progression throughout Western civilization, for sure. No doubting that. But for you to be correct that the concept of democracy is a result of the teachings of the Bible, we wouldn't just have to go with Western civ that comes out of the Roman Catholic Church, that comes out of Rome, that comes out of the time of the New Testament, right? That coming from Judaism. So everything, we'd have to find a civilization that didn't come at least culturally, right out of the Fertile Crescent, right? Like we could say everything came out of Africa, went up through that, like Iraq and Israel and that area into the rest of the world. And that's kind of where we get everything. But it would have to be a society that didn't emerge from Judaism. But if we could find countries that did, and they have democracy, then one might be able to make a pretty powerful statement that democracy is not based on the Bible.
It may not be based on the Bible, but again, it's going back to the moral principles, which the Bible clearly says God has written on the hearts of man. If God is creator and all of humanity, coming from, and we have this inherent, conscience that is part of us that God has given to us. All right, we have a morality detector, broken though they may be sometimes. You don't actually need to have it being from the Bible. Again, if morality is objective, universally applicable and knowable by all mankind, then it wouldn't be surprising that, in some places that you'd find things that would line up with what we would consider biblical principles. Of course, if the Bible's true, they're just general moral principles.
What if we said Japan, South Korea, India, Taiwan? What about Hong Kong, at least before China came over and took it over, right?
Yeah, we want that back. That's ours.
Yeah. Malaysia, Singapore.
Well, here's the thing. A lot of those places,
they suck. But they do have democracy, and a lot of the ones I named actually rank.
And I honestly don't know the answer to this, so I would have to look. Did they develop democracy before or after missionaries?
Ooh, that might be an interesting claim. And I don't know the answer to that one either. It would seem we're both in an impasse there. I don't know that I would even give credit to missionaries. That seems a little bold.
The earliest missionaries to Asia were back in like the 500s or 600s.
Really?
Yeah, they didn't really take
500s. That's like still during like Greece.
Yeah, I mean, it was something like almost 1,000 years before the really big. I think it was the Jesuits that were behind the really big.
Yeah,
push.
that'd have to be like kind of before Christianity as we know it today.
I mean, it was.
But either way, maybe Western civilization had an influence on those countries. That's a possibility. I would say it'd probably be more through trade or some kind of militaristic campaigns rather than missionary work affecting someone's actual whole political agenda. That seems a little bold. But perhaps I haven't considered that.
There's one thing that, and we've wandered all over the place, but there's one thing that I was like, never gets talked about on the issues of evil and suffering, and it's something you'll probably push back against because
fair enough.
I think it's human nature. Like I was saying before, when you take in the whole story, like if we're looking at the Bible, why would this God, who's supposed to be loving, allow this? When you stop and think about the role of man, I mean, if you look at Genesis, like, okay, he created everything, put man in the garden, life was great. Oh, but they sinned and messed it up. Well, back up before the sin. Mankind had a job. They weren't created just, to be, in God's terrarium, right? God creates mankind. He says, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue, and have dominion over the earth. The way this has often been interpreted, and you go back Jewish sources and early Christian sources and everything, what's called the cultural mandate or the Edenic mandate is, okay, he created mankind, put them in paradise, but the rest of the earth was untamed wilderness. And so the idea was, okay, go forward, spread paradise throughout the world. Go forth, subdue, and have dominion. So as God's representatives, that idea of the image of God has a functionality to it where his representative, his image, like an ambassador, kind of thing, was, God was giving us authority, responsibility over the earth to go tame the wilderness, bring order to the chaos, light to the darkness, whatever, illustration you want to use. But we sin. And so now we, kind of fighting for the other side, but the role is still there. So we were given responsibility over the earth and we messed it up, but it's still our responsibility. And so whenever, this is how I respond to me personally. Whenever I personally have that feeling that wants to rise up in me and go, why God? I'm like, oh, yeah, that's right. He gave it to us and, we made our bed, we got to lie in it. And so, that is the idea that we are responsible. And not only that we're responsible, our job is to overcome the chaos, to tame the wilderness. Well, now the wilderness includes sinful man. Well, we're still supposed to overcome that. One of my favorite memes, I don't know, you may have seen it. It's a cartoon of a guy sitting on a park bench with Jesus, and he's like, Jesus, man, why don't you do something about all this poverty and homelessness and suffering? And Jesus says, funny, I was going to ask you the same thing. because that's our job. That's what we were put here to do, was to tame the wilderness. Well, now the wilderness includes, sin and suffering, but it's still our responsibility.
Was there sin on the earth before the fall in the garden?
No.
Okay. So if we table that one, and then I say a kid that doesn't understand that running around in church is bad, it just doesn't know, and the kid's running around during service, should that kid be punished for doing the wrong thing, or should that kid be informed that that's wrong, would you say? Like, should I just grab that kid and just start smacking his butt, or should it be like, hey, come on, it's a kid, he doesn't understand, let's try to teach him?
Depends on the kid. I mean, if it's my kid, obviously it's just a mistake. You just got to correct it.
Right. If it's that other person's kid.
Perfect little angel. Now, other people's kid.
Right.
Well, I mean, part of raising, the word discipline often gets a bad connotation, but it's just, disciplining is training and instructing and teaching.
It'd be the same analogy if I'm backing up my car and, I run that kid over. That's not murder. You could say that's negligence. But it's not like I did it on purpose. I didn't know there was a kid behind me. Let's say I didn't have, the reverse cameras or what have you. I feel like in that same sense, one issue that I think is fair to criticize about your claim of God intended this all to be good, we screwed it up, is how could Adam have done something wrong if he didn't know what sin was, and sin didn't even exist before he took the fruit?
Well, he knew what disobedience would be.
How would he know disobedience is wrong?
Because God told him, hey, don't eat that tree.
How would he know that doing what God said is right and that disobeying God is wrong?
Because he's God.
How would he know that that's significant on an ethical level if there is no good or evil? There's at least not a knowledge of good and evil.
I don't know. Your question just, and I'm sorry, I don't want to be combative, but your question is just not making sense to me.
How would he know the difference between good and evil without the knowledge? How would he not know? Because he doesn't have a knowledge of good and evil.
Yeah, but he has a knowledge of, hey, the creator and author of life, my buddy here that I walk in the cool of the garden with, who gave us all of this wonderful things and blessed me with life and everything, he says don't do that there'll be bad consequences.
Yeah, but the snake did. How does he know doing what the snake says or what Eve says is wrong and doing what God says is right if he doesn't have a knowledge of good and evil?
He would have a knowledge of God, authority, sovereignty. Hey, he's the guy in charge. I'm supposed to do what he says.
I'm supposed to do what he says? That's a moral claim. He doesn't have a sense of morality. Okay. To borrow your word, his understanding of reality is amoral.
So what I understand the knowledge to be about the tree is it's an experiential knowledge. Right, you can have an intellectual, just awareness, just kind of fact-based awareness of something without really knowing what it's like. And so what happened is in the eating of the fruit, I don't think it was a magical fruit, right? But through the act of disobedience, mankind gained knowledge, experiential knowledge of good and evil. But prior to that, I mean, you can intellectually go, oh, I'm not supposed to do that.
So it's an experiential knowledge. That's fascinating. It's a fascinating concept. It's experiential. He knew right and wrong before.
He knew rules,
Well, we'd have to say right and wrong, not just rules, because breaking a rule that you don't think of as wrong is not immoral. So if I tell you, that's my dog, don't untie it from its leash, but you see me beating that dog and not feeding it, that might be a rule in my house or in my backyard. But that doesn't make it right or wrong. You're going to save that dog from me, or you might just put me on the leash and beat the crap out of me. Who knows? But still, just a rule doesn't make right?
Well,
so it would have to mean that sin did exist before that act for what you're saying to be true.
No sin had been committed.
No sin had been committed.
Sin didn't exist.
But it existed, at least conceptually.
Well, I mean, sure, but sin itself is the transgression of the law. It is the violation of the moral code of God.
That wouldn't make sense why we need to be saved. If sin is just action, then we wouldn't need salvation. It's, according to the way that I think we both would agree the Bible's written, at least the New Testament, sin is something that you're born with, and it's a result of that act. So it's not just bad acts.
Well, okay. So there's multiple different ways that culturally we use the word sin colloquially. We talk about sin, what you're referring to is like the sin nature, that we have this pride, this selfishness in us that wants us to do things our own way, right?
Not just that. The same thing that we're born with, that we need to be washed by the blood of the Lamb with. Not just the colloquial thing. I'm talking like the biblical definition of sin isn't just, cheating on your wife is a sin. It's also the thought. It's also something you're born with that you can't help but do without the grace of God, right? So your rebuttal to how could Adam have known it was wrong if he had no knowledge of good and evil, and you say, well, it's experiential, I think that falls apart whenever we reference the whole reason for needing salvation. Is that possible? I'm trying to take it at the way that you're saying it and consider that. I had never heard that argument before, but if I follow that to the nth degree, it would seem that that's not the same definition of sin that I'm saved from. That means that I can enter the throne room of God, right? I have to be sinless. It doesn't mean that I have to not have acts, because those acts are forgiven. It has to mean that I'm not tainted with this sin.
Well, I would say both.
If it's both, then how could Adam have done wrong?
You can innocently, you can, I'll use a word that you accused me of, naively. You can be naive, right? And you're talking to someone who is, right?
Sure.
And
both suffer
make
from that affliction.
Right? You can naively make a wrong choice that has consequences, and you could have been told, "Hey, don't do that." Yeah. And you're not supposed to. You're a little kid, and mom and dad says, don't play in the street. I mean, you're supposed to listen to mom and dad. And you can naively just decide, well, I want to play in the street. But then, once you got hit by a car, now you have some experiential knowledge about playing in the street.
Right, but that's back to the rule thing. Might doesn't make right. It wouldn't necessarily make it wrong. Disobeying your parents wouldn't necessarily be wrong. In your analogy, we would say that it's wrong as a rule, and that the consequences are fairly extreme for not following the rule. But I wouldn't say that falls into the area of ethics. Well,
by the act of disobedience, now mankind has something that has become part of their inherent to their nature, now corrupted nature, that was not there before.
So the sin that he committed wasn't the same sin that we're forgiven for, because his wasn't a sin in the same way that we have this corruptible nature. His was just breaking a rule. It wasn't necessarily morally wrong. It was just consequentially wrong.
I would say to disobey God is morally wrong.
But he couldn't have known that.
Well, sure he could have.
No, because we just agreed he didn't understand that. He just understood rules.
Well,
it's like a dog. If my dog bites me, it's not being immoral. It's breaking a rule. Now it has severe consequences. I'm going to punch the crap out of it or something. But it's not acting unethically. It doesn't have an understanding of human morality, and neither did Adam. He just, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's how you describe it. He was breaking a rule. Yeah, then he already had a knowledge of good and evil. Maybe not an experiential one, but he knew what sin was. And for him to know what sin was, sin would have to exist, at least conceptually.
Which is fine. There's no reason. I mean, you can conceive of something. I mean, that wouldn't be, he could conceive of it and then chose to do it.
Right, because even before he did it, if we're going off of experiential disobedience, it already existed. That version of it already existed with Satan. Satan had already disobeyed God.
I actually have an interesting view on this. I think that Satan and Adam fell at the same time. I think that Satan's tempting of them was his rebellion. That was his sinful act.
That was the moment. So Satan left heaven, turned into a snake, tricked Adam, within milliseconds of one another, and it was all just like this big bang of sin spreading across the universe.
We could get into the whole.
I'm not laughing. I'm not laughing because I'm laughing at you.
I'm really interesting. I don't know if you've heard of or listened to any Dr. Michael Heiser.
No, not familiar.
But he goes into how the word that we translate as serpent actually has another meaning, which we don't want to get off in the weeds on linguistics, but it could be referring, or most likely is referring, not to a serpent, but it's from a root of a word that refers to an angelic being. So it wasn't a snake, as we conceive of a snake, to be, tempting them. It could have been, Lucifer himself, just Lucifer. Hey guys, check out the tree. And who knows? They may have known Lucifer. That gets off into speculations. But if he was one of God's angels and they're in the garden, I don't know.
When there's an apparent contradiction in the Bible, you'll claim foundations and then turn things toward those foundational truths as you need the round peg to fit in the round hole accordingly. Or if something contradicts, knocking on the wood, reality, you will look at reality through the filter of your bias. I feel like if I present the same arguments that you do that are the antithesis of your argument, but show that if I base it off this bias, I can still make the same arguments you do and see the world through my filter. Therefore, it's not necessarily a good argument. You don't necessarily have a great rebuttal to approaching the world with that intellectual dishonesty. And then whenever we look at the morality of hell or the inconsistencies with evil or sin existing in the Garden of Eden, or the fact that he could create a world or a reality that has both free will and without sin and suffering, you create possible answers for this that are extra biblical, but possible explanations. And to me, that, I don't know, I'll say this much, while I'm finding each of these to be a problem for me to understand where you're coming from or accept where you're a problem for me to accept where you're coming from, I still enjoyed the conversation. I want to give you the last word to explain all that, and maybe that's a gish gallop, and I'm sorry if it is, but regardless, wrap us up, send us off, maybe even close us in a quick prayer, and tell everybody where they can find your content also, please, sir.
Okay. I think what I would say, it's not, let me put it this way. We all make determinations about things based on knowledge we already have, right? So if you're sitting there, clear blue sky in the middle of July, in central Texas, and someone comes walking in the door, dripping wet, and someone goes, oh, it must be raining outside. They must have got rained on. Well, no, that doesn't make any sense because I know it's not raining. Clear sky, summertime, central Texas, that's not from rain. So then you take what you're seeing and you put it into what you already know to be true about the world. And so when we get to the point that we know God exists, and you've had episodes on that, right? But coming from the Christian point of view, with what I'm convinced of, I know God exists. I know Christianity's true. And I know that based on the death, resurrection, salvation given to me by Jesus Christ, the act that he did, that God unequivocally, undeniably loves us. So then you get something that goes, okay, well, this hell thing seems weird. It's like, yeah, there might be some things that are hard to wrestle with, but I know this to be true. So now I have to make sense of that in light of what I already know to be true. And so I don't think that's an intellectual dishonesty. I think it's just the basic reasoning that we all do. We take what we know to be factual reality about the world, and then the things that are questioned, we address those on that basis.
Where can everybody find your content, Mr. Lambert?
Probably the easiest way would be go to YouTube. I'm there under Pastor Marc. Church website, lhbcmoody.org.
Did you want to close us in prayer?
Sure. Father God, I thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation. I thank you for people like Robert who are willing to have an open mind and to discuss with others, to let there be a free flow of information and ideas. God, I just pray that you would help us as we look around at the world, God, that we can approach it honestly and openly. God, that we would not put any blinders on, but just see the world as you have created it and as you have made it. Just pray that you would help this to encourage others. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you to Pastor Marc. Thank you to Dave Blair at DaveBlairMusic.com. Thank you to Feedspot.com for promoting the Right to Reason to the Top 10 Atheist Podcasts. Thank you to our patrons, Jason Parker, Freethinker215, Alan Marks, Philip Spawn, Bernard Lamberell, Anima Man, Larry Wilson, and our top supporter, Rob Montgomery. You can support this broadcast at patreon.com/right and learn more at therighttoreason.com. Next week, we're finding common ground and asking Rabbi Brian about the meaning of life. Between now and then, remember that you have the right to reason.
This is the Right to Reason podcast.